Riding in the sand has got to be one of the most challenging conditions for big adventure bikes. And when we asked you guys what you wanted to get tips for, what you wanted to improve, when we did that how to wheelie video, the sand riding was something that came up most frequently. So we've got a lot of information here. We're going to rely on you guys having watched and understood the correct standing position video, the cornering videos, those basic earlier ones. If you haven't watched those ones already, I really recommend you do. They're not based on sand riding, but the skills that you'll learn there are really relevant to this difficult terrain and going to make a lot of what you'll see now make more sense. So the first thing we want to look at is a little bit of bike setup, so tuning the bike so it will behave itself better in the sand. Obviously, if you're only going to ride a few hundred meters or a few kilometers of sand as part of your ride, you probably wouldn't bother to do these things that I'm going to show you now. But if you know you're going for a big long trip through sand, you're going to spend all day in the sand, a few little changes that we'll show you now are going to make quite a big difference to the way the bike behaves, and it's going to save you a lot of energy in a sand ride. So we're going to look at lowering the forks and the triple clamps to lift the front end of the bike, to raise the front end of the bike. We're going to pull the handlebars back a little bit to try and get a bit more stability and get your weight a little bit further towards the rear of the bike. And we're going to decrease the preload on the shock to increase the sag, so to get the back end of the bike to drop down a bit. All this is designed to try and make the bike track straighter through the sand, pull the weight of the bike back a bit, raise the front, lower the rear to get it to track straight, so you're not going to be messing around and flapping around in the sand so much and saving a lot of energy. This is totally worth the effort. We're going to be in the sand all day today, myself personally, so I'm going to put the effort in to make my day easier. So we'll get some tools out and get this bike set up. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is lower the forks down a bit to raise the front end of the bike and try to make it a bit more stable. So we're going to loosen off these bolts. So turning the fork this way will open up the clamps, make it easier for me to slide that fork down. Once I've done both sides, that's going to lift the front end of the bike. Ideally, you should be torquing these up with a torque wrench, but I don't have one of those in my tool bag, so click, click. So the next thing I'm going to do is roll the handlebars back a couple of degrees. This, I hope, will stabilize the bike more. It'll stop it tucking on the sand, or help stop it to anyway, and pull my weight a little bit further back on the bike, which is going to allow that front end to stay high and not dig into the sand. Back them off of it. So we're going to come back just a couple of degrees. So the next thing I'll do is I'll reduce the preload on my spring. Not all adventure bikes have a quick adjuster here. If your bike doesn't have a quick adjuster, I probably wouldn't bother doing it myself, but I've got the quick adjuster on these WP ProSpec stuff, so I'm going to use it. Cool, so I've already got my tyres let down to a sensible sort of off-road pressure for the terrain. For me, that's somewhere in the early 20s in terms of PSI. A little bit more on the front than I have the rear, so maybe I've got, around here there's not a lot of rock at all, so I'm going to have maybe 23 in the front, about 20 in the rear, something about there. Hopefully these little changes that I've made will make my bike a little bit easier to ride in the sand. It's going to save me some energy, and it's only really taken me 5 minutes, so totally worth the effort. I'll pack the stuff away and we'll get into riding them. Okay, so your basic body position on the bike, in the sand you want to be trying to stand up as much as you can. It's pretty much the same as our basic standing position, so what we covered in the earlier video. The difference would be you want to be a little bit further back in terms of weight bias in the sand. How much further back depends on how soft the sand is. So if it's not terribly soft, my normal standing position would be in here. We're talking about coming from here, maybe back to about here. The mistake a lot of guys will make is as soon as they get into the sand, they're right out the back the whole time, and you're not in the best point of balance, your control's not so great, and the front end's going to start messing around the place too much. So if our normal standing position is in here, we're coming back into about here. As that sand gets softer and softer, we're going to fold back through the hips more, still keeping the knees locked in, still keeping the ankles locked in to kind of keep that grip of the bike, but pushing your hips back, trying to put that weight into the back tire more and stop that front tire from digging in too much. Only in super crazy soft sand am I right back in here, and it's only momentarily just trying to get that drive back, trying to get that speed back. If I ride along like this, I'm just not going to be in any control. Bad things are going to happen. So it's back there to get the bike moving and then coming back into a more sort of reasonable position into there. One of the most important things to be aware of in the sand is trying to avoid using your handlebars for the balance. We've talked a lot about this in previous videos, but this is where it really becomes important in the sand. So if you start relying on your handlebars, making corrections through your bars to correct your balance all the time, the front's going to start sledging around in the soft sand and you're going to start weaving down the trail. You end up making marks that look like a snake's been down the trail. As much as possible, we want to be able to leave the handlebars alone, and as we talked about before, create that balance and that control through your hips, independent of your steering. That's going to let the bike track straight, the front's not going to sledge in the sand, and you're going to be able to hold your line. This can save you a lot of energy in the sand, but it's quite a big habit to change, so you know it's not a small thing to do. You're asking your body to use your hips and your foot pegs to do the balance work that you're normally used to using your hands for. So it's quite a big change. It takes a while to get your head around it. So one of the most important factors of the sand is you need to be aggressive. The more aggressive you are with the sand, the more control you're going to have. If you're too gentle, the sand kind of takes control. So we're using way more aggression on the throttle, way more horsepower, way more wheel spin than we would in any other terrain. Basically, I'm using throttle inputs that would have me shooting off into the trees anywhere else because I lose so much into that sand. When I come through the corners, I'm getting so much harder on the gas than I would do in any other terrain. Because I'm losing so much of the sand, I've got to give it so much more. That stops the front end from digging in and allows the front to stay nice and light and plow through the turn. If I don't get on that gas, the front's going to bury, it all starts to mess around. So you've probably heard the expression, if in doubt, power out. Nowhere is that more true than in the sand. If you start to get the front too heavy, the bike starts to mess around. Even though you might not want to, 9 times out of 10 you can fix it just by winding on that power and accelerating harder. So the good thing is when you get the confidence in the sand, it becomes really good fun because you can be so much more aggressive. You can get so much harder on that power than you can do in any other situation. And that aggression, that aggressiveness in your riding ends up becoming a lot of fun. The awkward truth with riding adventure bikes in the sand is the faster you're going, the easier it becomes. So if you're thinking like the Dakar guys, they're roaring across the desert, going flat out, you know, maybe doing 100 kilometers an hour across the desert. They can take their hand off, suck on their camelback, you know, scratch their butt, whatever it is. When they come into a checkpoint and they've got to slow down to a stop, that's when you see the bike starting to flap around the sand and, you know, it becomes way more fatiguing to ride. So the important thing is getting going from a standstill, trying to get up to that speed as quickly as you can. So the technique from that is, again, we're going to do it really aggressively. We're going to stand up on the bike, you're going to have your hips back a bit more. We're going to start in second gear. So you're building up the RPM in the engine, and then feeding that power to the ground using your clutch really aggressively, weight back, and trying to get from 0 to maybe 30 kilometers an hour as quickly as you possibly can. The time where you're going from 0 to 30 is the most difficult part in the sand. Once you're up to speed, the bike sort of comes up out of the sand, it's not flapping around so much. A good way to think about it is think of it like a speedboat. When you're going slowly, the boat's pushing all the water in front of it, it's wallowing down deep in the water, it's really inefficient, lots of corrections, hard to drive the boat in that situation. Once the guy puts his foot down, the boat pops up out of the water, goes dead straight, becomes efficient, becomes fast. Exactly the same as a bike. So a good way to think about it, imagine your bike being like a boat. When the boat's going slow, all the water's building up in front of it, the boat's not efficient, it's wallowing around, the driver's having to make loads of corrections. Once the guy puts his foot down, the boat pops up out of the water, becomes fast, becomes efficient, skims across the top. That's exactly what we want. So I'll show you the technique for that, show you how it works. So we're going to need lots of wheel spin for this. We want full aggression, so we're going to have to turn the traction control off completely. It's much easier to start off in second gear. When you get it going in first, that shift into second, you've got to come out of the power to do that. The bike's going to bog back down in the sand again and start the flap going. So it's a lot easier to start aggressively in second gear. Again, you're going to lose so much to wheel spin that the bike's not going to stall. You've got loads of aggression, loads of power, so the stall's not really a factor. So we're going to have 1 foot on the foot peg, 1 foot on the ground, hips back to put that weight into the back tyre, a bit of pull through the handlebars to kind of leverage that front end up and put more push into the back tyre, then a big aggressive launch on the power. So because I was aggressive, the bike tracked pretty straight and I got up to that sort of planing speed as quickly as I could. If I'm too gentle on that, if I take too long to do it, it makes the amount of energy required a lot greater. It's a lot harder to do. So I'll do one again now, and I'll do it slower, do it more gently, I'll undersell it a bit, and you'll see how much more I have to work. Okay. So again, second gear, traction control off. I'm going to undersell this one a bit. Whew, that was significantly harder. I had to make a lot of corrections in my body, and I started to get that big weave going. Because it took me too long to go from standstill up to that kind of planing speed. So you can see the first one, lots of aggression, got to that sort of planing speed really quickly, bike went dead straight. Second time, it took me too long to get up to speed, and I was wobbling around, the sand started to take over, and I had to make all these different corrections, and it, looks like a snake's gone down the trail. So the key points there, starting off in second gear, traction controls off, weights back towards the rear, and really aggressive, trying to get to that planing speed, 30 kilometers an hour as fast as we possibly can. So the next thing we're going to talk about is cornering in the soft sand and avoiding that dreaded front wheel tuck in the soft sand, falling to the inside, lifting your bike in the hot and the sand. Nobody likes that in their lives.